In Lesson 2.5, you'll be adding and subtracting like fractions. Like fractions are fractions that have the same denominator, such as 1/5 plus 3/4. To add or subtract like fractions, add or subtract the numerators and write the result over the denominator. Over here on the right, I have the steps for adding and subtracting fractions. The first step we're not going to have to do in this lesson. The first step is to get a common denominator. All of the fractions you'll be adding and subtracting in this lesson will already have a common denominator. The second step is to add or subtract the numerators and put them on top. And then third step is to keep the denominator the same. And the last step is to simplify if needed. In our first example, 5/8 plus a negative 7/8. We need to remember our rules about negatives. If you have one of each, you aren't going to add your two fractions. You are going to actually subtract them, and you're going to subtract the one that has the greatest absolute value minus the smaller one. So this problem is really going to be 7/8 minus 5/8. So we're going to do 7 minus 5, which is 2, and keep the denominator of 8. And then the sign is the sign of the number that has the greatest absolute value, or the one furthest from 0 on a number line. So in this case, that's going to be the negative 7/8. So our answer is negative 2/8, but that can be simplified because both 2 and 8 can be divided by 2. So we end up with a negative 1/4. You may want to pause the video and try the next 3 on your own. Okay, in our next example, 5/9 plus 7/9, they're both the same sign, so we're going to go ahead and add them. We're going to add the numerators. 5 plus 7 is 12, and we're going to keep the denominator the same, so that's going to be a 9. Now 12/9 is an improper fraction, so we're going to change it to a mixed number, and we're also going to need to simplify it. 9 goes into 12 one time with 3 left over. Keep the denominator the same. And then the 3/9 can be simplified because they can both, the 3 and the 9 can both be divided by 3. So you end up with 1 and 1/3. In the next example, you have one positive and one negative. So instead of adding these two numbers, you're going to subtract them. And you're going to do the bigger one minus the smaller one, or actually the one with the largest absolute value minus the one with the smaller absolute value. So 5 minus 1 is 4. Keep the denominator the same. And since this one is the one with the greatest absolute value, or the furthest from 0, and it's negative, your answer is going to be negative. So negative 4/9. In this last example, you are going to actually add these two together because they're both the same sign. 5 plus 1 is 6. Keep the denominator the same. And since they're both the same sign, you're going to keep the sign. But 6/6 is the same thing as 1 because both the numerator and denominator can be divided by 6, and you end up with negative 1. Example 2 is about subtracting like fractions. With subtraction of like fractions, you'll have to keep in mind your rules for negatives. If it's subtracting with negatives, you want to change it to adding the opposite. So this negative 8/9 minus 7/9, you want to change to adding the opposite. So it's a negative 8/9 plus a negative 7/9. Now they're both the same sign, so you're going to add them. 8 and 7 is 15. Keep the denominator the same. And also, since they're the same sign, you're going to keep the sign. Now we just need to simplify. Both 15 and 9 can be divided by 3. So we end up with a negative 15 divided by 3 is 5. And 9 divided by 3 is 3. This is an improper fraction, so we'll have to go and make it a mixed number. It's still going to be negative. 3 goes into 5 one time with 2 left over. Keep the bottom the same. You may want to pause the video and try the next 3 on your own. In this example, negative 4/5 minus 3/5, you're going to change it to adding the opposite, or chop minus. And they're both the same signs again, so you're going to add the numerators. 4 plus 3 is 7. Keep the denominator the same. A negative plus a negative is still going to be negative. You keep the sign. This is an improper fraction though, so change it to a mixed number. It's going to be a negative 1 because 5 goes into 7 one time with 2 left over. Keep the denominator the same. Negative 1 and 2/5. 3/8 minus 5/8, you are taking a bigger number away from a smaller number, so you're going to change it to adding the opposite. Now they're different signs, so rather than add, you're going to subtract, and you're going to subtract the one with the bigger absolute value minus the one with the smaller absolute value. So negative 5, or sorry, just 5 minus 3 is 2. Keep the denominator the same. And since this is the fraction with the largest absolute value and it's negative, our answer is going to be negative. Now we just need to simplify it by dividing both the numerator and denominator by 2. And you end up with negative 1/4. In 5/7 minus negative 4/7, subtraction with negatives, change it to adding the opposite, or chop chop. Now they're both positive, so you're going to just go ahead and add the numerators. 5 plus 4 is 9. Keep the denominator. Since they're both positive, your answer, you're going to keep positive, but it's an improper fraction again. So 7 goes into 9 one time with 2 left over. Keep the denominator the same. 1 and 2/7. Next up, we're going to be adding mixed numbers. In the first example here of 5 and 7/9 plus 8 and 4/9, we're going to go ahead and add the whole number part. 5 plus 8 is 13. And then we're going to add 7/9 plus 4/9. 7 plus 4 is 11. Keep the denominator the same. This right here is a little weird looking though. We have an improper fraction in our mixed number. So we're going to go and take this 11/9 and rewrite that as 9 going into 11 one time with 2 left over. Keep the bottom the same. So it's really 13 plus 1 and 2/9. 13 plus 1 and 2/9 is 14 and 2/9. In our next example, we have subtracting mixed numbers. 9 minus 3 is 6. 5/8 minus 3/8. You will go ahead and subtract 5 minus 3, which is 2. Keep the denominator the same. But 2/8 can be simplified by dividing both the numerator and denominator by 2. So you end up with 6 and 1/4. Now the last example like this is a little weird in that we are taking a mixed number away from a whole number. We're going to rename 8 as 7 and 9/9. 7 and 9/9 has the same value as 8 because 9/9 is 1 and 7 plus 1 is 8. The reason why I used ninths was because the other fraction had a 9 in the denominator. So I'm going to go ahead and do 7 and 9/9 minus 6 and 2/9. 7 take away 6 is 1, and 9/9 take away 2/9. 9 minus 2 is 7. Keep the denominator the same. 1 and 7/9. Our last example says horses are measured by a unit called a handbreadth or hand. How much taller is a horse that is 14 1/4 hands tall than one that is 12 3/4 hands tall? If you want to know how much taller one is than the other, we're going to find the difference between the two. So the problem we're going to solve is 14 1/4 minus 12 3/4. Now before we go and subtract, we're actually going to write this problem a little different way, because if I were to go and subtract right now, I would do 14 minus 12 and get 2, but then when I would go to do 1/4 minus 3/4, it would end up being negative. That's not going to work that way. So what we need to do is rewrite 14 1/4 as 13 5/4. Basically, what we're doing is we're taking 1 away from this 14 and making it a 13, and then we're going to move 1 whole over to the 1/4 that's already there. 1/4 plus 4/4 that I move over because I took 1 away from the 14 to make 13. When I move 4/4 over to the 1/4, 4/4 plus 1/4 is 5/4. Basically, this right here has the same value as 14 1/4. Now we should be able to go and subtract. 13 take away 12 is 1. 15/4 minus 3/4. Sorry, 5/4 minus 3/4. 5 minus 3 is 2. And then you keep the denominator the same. Simplify by dividing both the numerator and denominator by 2. 1 1/2. The first horse is 1 1/2 hands taller.